Happy New Year, Therapy Flow community. Hey, welcome back. This is our first broadcast of 2023, and we're excited to be here.
We are. We've got an awesome topic for you guys today. It's a space that we're certainly eager to dive deeper in with. But really, it's the solos who are branching out and becoming group practices for the very first time. Or maybe started and you kind of bumped your way up and you haven't made it all the way just yet, or it's been a rough ride. So,
Yeah. And honestly, I'd say this is probably going to be relevant for anyone with under probably 5 or 6 clinicians. I think everything that we're going to share here today, if you're sub 6 clinicians, is going to be invaluable for you. So we're going to ask and answer the question, what do you need to do to go from solo to a thriving great group practice in 2023, right? And we're going to put some parameters on this. And so when we are talking about this, there are some expectations that we have around you as a solo practice and then you as a group practice. So there's both some assumptions we're going to make, and then we're also going to share some feedback points that we believe about the group practice opportunity that a lot of clinicians don't take into account. Meaning, after working with hundreds of practices and many that have done this transition, or we've had the opportunity to see, try, and struggle through being a group practice and make it successful, there are just some lessons that if you get right the first time and you understand what you're doing, sort of the game you're playing from the very start, it's going to make making this transition, it's going to make being a group practice owner genuinely worthwhile. Because, and this kind of can be our starting off point, there is a very specific world and a very specific reality where being a group practice owner just isn't worth it. It might look like the cool, new, flashy thing to do that everyone's doing and everyone's going, just like at what point starting your own solo practice was the case. But there are really good reasons not to become a group practice owner, and there are really good reasons to become a group practice owner. So hopefully today we can clarify and save you some pain and suffering, right? If you're trying to dive into this in the next 3 to 6 months or beyond.
yeah, I'd say when is it not a good time to be a group practice owner? One, if you don't want extra responsibility, if you don't like taking risk, if you're afraid of like extra work, if because the reality is there's going to be a lot of work up front, especially when it comes to building, and especially when it comes to you having to take hours, unless you just magically have a lot of money in the bank somehow. You're going to be doing a lot of work. You're going to be doing a lot of work. You're going to be learning a lot of new things. And so, if that doesn't sound like what you want to do, don't do group practice. Because what's kind of interesting is until you start reaching the 5 to 8 therapist point, you're not making so much more money that it outweighs how much you are personally bringing into the practice. And the work that you'll have to do to sort of supplement the additional income there. So the truth is, if you're not going to go bigger, um, basically You'll make more money, but you're going to have so much more responsibilities that it's going to feel like you're kind of burning the candle at both ends. So keep that in mind, guys. If that doesn't sound like what you want, then don't do that. If it sounds like, hey, I can push through the risk, because there is a really big, bright world. I really think that big group practices it can actually do a lot of really, really good for the world and for the people who own them. But the so like the vision there is really, really big. You can get a lot of freedom, you can get a lot of income, you can do a lot of big things with a group. However, it's going to take work, and it's going to take risk, and it's going to take learning new things, and it's going to take having to deal with people, and it's going to take a lot of change, a lot of different things before you get to its
Yeah.
passive income, right?
Yeah, definitely.
um, so keep
And
that in mind.
yeah, and to speak into that, there's kind of three key things that I want you to think about. Number one, there are the skills, the traits, and the functions you need to have to be a great business owner in general, right? And you've had to come up with those to hopefully have a successful, great solo practice, right? And then there are the specific things that you need that are in the solo practice opportunity in and of itself. Going the group practice route very, very few, if any, of the core skills or traits that you have a successful solo practice disappear or change. You only add additional skills, traits, or functions when you grow the group practice route. And maybe it'd be helpful, a couple of the core things that you really have to get down as a successful solo practice, especially like a successful cash pay solo practice. Number one is your marketing, right? You have to figure out how to market yourself and bring in new clients into your practice. You have to figure out how to convert them, your set appointments, close appointments. You have to convert them into new clients. And then you have to just provide good therapy. But you're your own quality control to provide therapy. Maybe there's some billing, administrative things that you have to figure out, right? But there, one, are some additional things that you have to learn or acquire if you're going to go the group practice route. But each one of those buckets gets multiplied by the quantity of clinicians under your roof, right? If now you were a competent marketer to just barely fill your own solo practice, right? Now you have to be a competent marketer to fill out 10 people or 20 people or the size of your group practice, right? You now have to run a sales desk or a sales organization to convert hundreds of leads in a month instead of 10 inquiries in a month. You have to do billing for 10, right? So it's a multiplication point, and we have to sustain the new flow. That is big giant skill trait number one, is can we handle the multiplication of what's there? And then there are a couple core buckets of new skills, new processes, and we'll dig into a couple of these. Number one is recruitment. You have to have, just like a marketing skill set or something else to attract new clients, you have to have a recruitment and an organizational skill set to attract great clinicians. Maybe you can unpack that new skill that you have to acquire if you're going to be a group practice affiliate.
Yeah, so we have this analogy that we talk about, like the game that you're playing, right? And the game for solos is getting filled on your schedule, on your time, and getting filled at a rate that's going to not only pay you, but pay your practice. When it comes to the group, you no longer really get compensated. I mean, you get compensated based on you taking hours, but you really get compensated. You get compensated maximally when you have more therapists taking more hours. So when we're looking at it like broad scope, when we're looking at this as like, how do I actually run a good group practice? How do I get compensated maximally? What that comes down to is, yes, you need to be able to fill your clinicians. So marketing is still important. However, getting more clinicians is also paramount, and it's actually almost bigger eventually than the marketing itself, because in a lot of ways you can market yourself pretty effectively, but if you don't have the clinicians to be able to take the hours, it becomes a little bit sticky. And I think this is where a lot of chicken and egg situation happens with therapists. Is they're like, well, I don't know, should I have the therapist first, or do I need to do the marketing? Do I turn one on and one off, and one on and one off? And I'm here to tell you that there is no chicken and egg situation. That's made up. The chicken and egg situation goes like this: you have to have marketing, so your marketing needs to be working. Then you need to be able to bring in new clinicians. So market yourself. It's okay to turn away clients. It's okay to refer out. It's okay to turn off your marketing for a little bit. It's okay to XYZ, but you need to have your marketing set, and then you're recruiting. But they both need to ultimately, so at the end here, they both need to be running simultaneously, and they both need to be running in an aggressive enough manner that you have big pipelines for new clients and new clinicians.
Let me put it this way. For the chicken and the egg situation, if you don't have the ability to go out and find the chicken, so to speak, right? You gotta buy a chicken, you gotta find a chicken, you gotta catch a chicken, whatever, right? That's your marketing. If you don't have the clarity or the insight on where you're going to get your chicken from, you don't ever need, like, you're never gonna get any eggs, right? And so what that means for you is if you don't have the ability to ramp up your marketing, I have working ads. Let me spend more on ads when I hire a new clinician, right? I have a working listing site strategy, I have a working networking strategy, and it's about ramping it up, or I already have an excess or an overflow, right? If you can't connect the dots between whatever quantity of referrals you're currently getting and the new number you need to get when you hire one, two, three, 10 people, then that's the problem you get to solve first. And then as a subset, you get to work on the recruitment problem as well, because you will always fail at marketing and you will never have your clinicians full if you don't figure out that process first. You are set up for success as a group practice owner if you have a roadmap to ramp up. If you're like, man, I don't really know how I got all of my referrals, or I don't really know how I keep a full caseload, right? Then you don't understand the strategy that maybe you did or didn't implement. Maybe you got lucky. That's totally fine, right? But you have to systematically figure it out if you want to step into a multiplication ring on this thing. But yeah, recruitment, you get compensated for recruitment now in addition to your marketing skill. And then the other big skill sets that you have to acquire are people management and systems and operations, deploying systems and operations. People management and deploying systems and operations. And those go hand in hand because typically it's managing people who manage the systems and operations that you are deploying, right? Because you're trying to get things off of your plate, and either a system and operation has to manage that or a person has to manage those things. And so outsourcing, management, leadership skills, vision casting, all those types of things are rooted in managing your people really well and your organization really well. And you're not going to be able to grow a group practice unless you can work with those things in the way that they need. It all breaks apart and you'll get stuck, and it kind of falls apart from there.
Yeah. I so we've just talked about sort of like traits that we sort of need to have, and the types of knowledge, the types of information that we need to deploy. I want to talk really quickly about the differences between the solo and the group in how do we need to maybe think about money? How do we maybe need to think about like what kinds of things we need to do, I guess might be a good way to look at it. Because a lot of them sound like, oh, well, yeah, I need to do that kind of stuff for my solo. And there's a lot of like blurred lines, but the less blurred lines there are, the better. The less blurred lines there are, the better. So taking a look at what kinds of things need to happen for a solo practice. Typically, the kinds of things that need to happen for solo practice include marketing. You need to be able to take your phone calls. You need to be able to schedule yourself. You need to be able to take new clients, and then you need to be able to, get back to current clients or get back to prospective clients. And so, in a lot of ways, there's a little bit of administrative work. You own your job. The bookkeeping is pretty limited, right? You have the money comes in, it's all done through your EMR. You're the only person who's doing the billing. Whether you're cash pay or insurance, it doesn't matter. But there's sort of like your headaches that you have to deal with. Your intakes, really that's it. Really that's it. The world is kind of small. The world is kind of small. You can master that pretty quickly. But once you move to the group, you start needing to think a little bit differently. And I think where a lot of solos break is because they start thinking of themselves as a primary income earner for the group versus an employee of the organization. And so one, pay starts getting broken down, and you start not distributing costs effectively for all of the clinicians. And so one of the biggest advantages to owning a group is that you get to sort of share the costs across the clinicians that are coming in. And so if you have costs, they get effectively split between all of the members of the group. And so where that's really, really nice is if you do have costs involved, your costs do get sort of lower the more individuals that you have. However, you need to have more individuals. And so when you're looking at how to effectively grow your group, or when you're looking at effectively how to move from solo to group, you need to start making these considerations of, hey, I'm now an employee of my group. I'm making this amount of money. and then stack out the rest of the clinicians that exist there.
Yeah. And I'd say that your calendar now, how you segment your calendar, needs to reflect being a group practice owner instead of a solo practice owner. The calendar of a solo practice owner is primarily filled with one on one session slots. And then on top of that, a little bit of business management function, and then maybe a medium amount of probably some marketing efforts and other things to keep that caseload full and running, right? So if we're splitting it up, probably about 70% of the time is spent on doing sessions, 20% of the time is spent or should be spent on marketing and business development, and maybe 10% of the time is spent on core business functions like taxes, billing, and whatever else, right? Looking at your schedule. That needs to shift because if you want to be compensated on an organizational level instead of an individual level, you can't be putting 70% of your time still into your one-on-one individual sessions. So if that means you're doing 20 to 30 sessions on a weekly basis, that probably needs to be cut in half or more, especially when you're in the build phase if you want to build the thing. Now, it's probably going to be sort of a tight transition if you're using current business money to pay for future business money, make this transition. We've got some thoughts and feelings on that maybe we'll come back to. But bottom line is now recruitment, marketing, and other business development things, right? Business building needs to now take the lion's share of your schedule, and your hour to hour, what shows up on your schedule needs to appear. Otherwise, you will either not reach your goals or you'll reach your group practice goals a lot slower than what you want. And it's kind of going to be a painful, slow death because you're either A, never going to hit a critical mass, never build up the momentum to crack the code on group practice, or B, it's going to take you 3, 5, 10 years to get there. And you're going to wonder, why am I always at 2 clinicians or 3 clinicians? Or why am I the only one making money in this practice? Why am I working so hard still? Or why do clinicians always leave me, right? There's all these whys that happen when the business is struggling, and that's rooted in getting your calendar right from the very start.
Yeah. So if you can't afford that, find a plan to be able to afford it. So if that means, hey, I can't, there's no way that I could change my schedule from 70% one-on-one sessions to 70% business building. There's no way that you could do that, right? Then maybe find a plan to exit from that. And it might be scary, very likely that it will be scary for you. However, if you put together a good plan for yourself, if you do the math, if you figure out how many clinicians you need, how many clinicians need to be full, what the work looks like, you kind of just do some math for yourself and stick to the plan. What's going to end up happening is you find an exit for yourself that very much is a different situation, and it actually ends up hitting your goals the way that you want to hit your goals.
Yeah, and here's a couple quick suggestions on making that transition from solo to group. Number one is you could, if you're cash pay, you could double your prices or something close to that and cut your session load in half, right? That could be an adaptive solution. You'll make the same amount so you can float the next steps, but you have twice as much time now. Another solution is you could look at, what is, let's say easy math, if a clinician makes $100 in the session and you do a 60-40 split, right? That means $40 is coming back into the practice before any of your costs. So that means you would essentially need to have either 3 sessions done or 3 clinicians doing sessions to replace that $100 you would have made as an individual. So a different way to think about it is, how quickly can I get to 3 clinicians doing sessions? And that will pay, and then a little bit plus some, right? That will pay me more every time 3 clinicians do one session, right? That will pay me to not do one of my sessions. And there's versions of this all over the place that you can reconfigure to make the financial aspect work as you go in the other direction. And then a couple other logistics to sort of make this transition. Number one is you can hire virtually. So we have a practice owner. She came off of maternity leave. She was a solo practice. We helped her refill her caseload using and cracking the code on active advertising. She sat with that for about 3 months. So she maintained a full caseload, loved it, made great cash, did a lot for about 3 months. And then at the turn of this year was like, wow, I am ready to go the group practice route. Um, and she easily made that transition from where she was at, and it was a pretty simple process because she had acquired and put together all of the skills, the processes and templates for her practice to run smoothly, and she only needed to bump up one thing, which was recruitment, and then do that quickly, and everything else was following after that.
Yeah. What's kind of interesting, guys, the upside is immense for a group practice. The upside is immense for a group practice. And so I think where a lot of people get stuck is they'll find themselves seeing the costs rise. Well, now I have to spend more for office space, or now I have to spend more on my marketing, or now I have to spend more here, or spend more there, or spend more here. But we have to keep in mind the opposite. If you're spending more, typically that means you're making more. If you're not, that means you're probably mismanaging something. It means you're probably mismanaging something. And
Yeah.
so if you're finding yourself in a point of struggle, if you're finding yourself in a point of struggle, or my favorite is basically it's the small group, they're stuck at three counselors or something like that. It's between two extra therapists or five therapists. We see a lot of group practices that just get stuck there because there's some kind of gross mismanagement. They're trying to do too much. I think what I'll maybe end with here, unless you wanted to keep going deeper, Josh.
I think we should give maybe a bullet point list of steps of just like some of the logistics practically, and I can give some of those in a second here. But we've hit a lot, and we've given some great starting points for sure.
Yeah. So before we get to the bullet points on steps to transition, I would say things to consider on a solo practice end. You just need one good marketing platform for yourself. You need to be selling one thing essentially. You don't necessarily need an admin. However, once you're kind of churning and burning, you're full, you can have an admin for yourself. So 0 to 1 admins. And then essentially the last little piece would be, do you have your general fulfillment system set up for yourself, your intake and your fulfillment system? And
Yeah.
so solo, that's all you need. Then once you're at a group size, you need to have 1 to 3 marketing channels that are working for you. You need to have 3 to 5 or more therapists helping you do fulfillment. You can have 1 to 2 types of things that you're selling, 1 to 2 types of things that you're marketing. I wouldn't try to stretch it too far unless you really want to take a generalist approach. And then you'll have certainly an administrative team member, 1 to 2 admins, depending on the size of your practice. And then you're also looking at possibly having one extra source. I don't want to, I think you guys might resonate it, but like one source of extra income, but it doesn't necessarily need to be like one extra source of income. But you could have sort of a second or a segment that's helping you sort of recycle all of the extra people that you have coming through your practice. Maybe that's like group sessions, maybe that's like whatever else. So typically that's the progression, that's sort of the transition. And then we can kind of touch on your bullet points to make a transition.
Yeah. So, if you're asking the question like what logistics do I have, and we're not going to go too deep on a lot of these. If you're going to be an insurance-based practice, number one is you need to apply for your NPI two number. Like that's sort of the starting point, or you need to incorporate in a slightly different way. You need to legally set yourself up to be a group entity and or be able to get your clinicians credentialed under you if you go that route, right? That would be step one that you need to start with. Step two is essentially increasing marketing or seeing referral conversions start to go up. Step three is to start that recruitment process. And there's a couple logistics that need to happen in that recruitment process. Number one is probably a question of like, do I hire someone with a different specialty? Do I hire someone with the same specialty? Do I, fill in a bunch of questions there? If you already have marketing that's working, I would say try and keep likeness and likeness. So if you're a adolescent counselor, right? Maybe your first hire or two should be a similar process because you have marketing that works for that. If you don't have any marketing and you're trying to crack the code on that for the first time, try and find an easy niche, an easy process, an easy whatever to gain momentum quickly. Find what your market needs that maybe you're not even fulfilling on and hire to that accordingly and push into that space from there. And then from there is we get the question of like, should I start with one person, hire them, fill them out, and then do the next one and do the next one? The only reason to slow yourself down would be for your own comfort level, or if you don't have the marketing that's there that can be ramped up. And our suggestion is work hard on the marketing so you can ramp it up quickly, and then always be doing recruitment activities, right? Always be recruiting, meaning don't turn off your ads, don't stop doing interviews. Have that be a new process, a new habit, a new cyclical activity that you're putting into. Uh, you can do job postings on Indeed, Facebook groups, a couple other places. Maybe another time we'll do a little thing on recruitment specifically if you're trying to like recruit your first therapist. And then from there, once those three things are flowing, right? It's probably ending with the question is what is your freedom number? And your freedom number comes in two places, okay? Freedom number one is what will replace my current income? How many counselors do I have to hire and keep full to replace the income I am making from one on one sessions? Because if you get your practice to that point, and that's usually somewhere around 4 to 7 counselors, depending on your rates in your state and some of those things, if you get your practice to the point where you have enough people on your team that are filled out, your practice or you specifically doing sessions is now no longer necessary for you to make a living income. And that is an incredible freedom that will change your life by having a business that produces that for you rather than you being the individual that produces that for you. The amount of time you can take off and other things. The second freedom number is what will make this worthwhile for me? What will be doing all of this work, hiring all these people, having to learn all these new skills and traits and go after this thing, right? How much money or what kind of impact, or and it's probably a mix of both, would I need to have to make the group practice opportunity worth it for me? And for some of you, it might be just replacing your income, right? And being able to take longer periods off or managing it. For some of you, it will be, I would need to make several $100,000, or I would need to employ 20 clinicians and be the number one thing in my area, right? This can be a slightly different type of goal, either monetary or impact or something else. But my encouragement for you is there are a lot of ways to achieve freedom in your practice, and there are a lot of ways to make money at both as a solo and as a group practice owner. So getting really clear on what will make this worthwhile for you and what you need to build to see the outcome that you want is going to help you get there faster. Um, we spend a lot of time talking about this in our program as we actually do the nuts and bolts of every single one of these steps as people transition to either running or developing their group practice for the first time. So you can certainly reach out to us or comment on this thread specifically for us to do deeper dives. If you have something that you want us to do a much bigger thing on, like recruitment or something else, as one of these Facebook Lives, we're more than happy to do that, and let us know as we're digging into things. What else? What other sauce can we share today, Attilio?
Um, as you're working with more people, having processes in place is important, right? Processes and higher leverage activities, right? So if you're working with a group, if you are working through a group, remember a lot of this comes down to what are the processes that you're putting together so that you and your team can deliver the goods consistently, and then what are the high leverage activities that you can take so that way you're maxing out your time.
Yeah.
uh, I think that's all I've got left for that. there's quite a bit, that they can
Yeah.
simmer on. So
I've got two last thoughts. Number one is just do it, right? Like if this excites you, if you want to get after it, if you're like afraid, if you're timid, like those are valid, but at the end of the day, like people do this every day and have multi-million dollar practices. Like I talk to people that are doing between $2 and $2 million on a weekly basis with their group practices or more, right? So if they can do it, if we can do it, you can do it. And it's an incredible opportunity. So if you're thinking about it, explore it, dig into it, and get after it this year. And number two, my last piece of encouragement, group practice owners who start a group practice and construct a group practice. They treat it like a building, right? A building has a start to finish process that it is eventually built and then is now usable, right? Construct your business. Don't start and run your business. And it's a fundamental mindset. Constructing takes an approach of business materials, of what am I building, what are all the core elements needed to complete a group practice system. Running a successful group practice is a known thing. There is a start to finish, what should the building generally look like? What do most successful group practices all have that make them fully constructed, right? And we shared a lot of those pieces that you need to have in place. So come at it with the mindset of constructing the business, putting all the pieces together and building it and finishing the build, and you'll have a group practice at the end of it, rather than just saying, oh, I'm going to start this thing and see where it goes, right? It actually has an end completion. There's actually a cyclical thing, a final product that you can arrive at and scale up or down once you get to a certain size, right? And we shared a lot of those details. So my encouragement to you is have the mindset of, oh, this is the year I'm going to construct an amazing, powerful, revenue generating group practice that has a huge impact on my community. And if you approach it that way, you will have a great business this year. And I hope that helps you.
I love it.